Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Solutions with Aquarius Rising Africa on Soulful Sunday. And I'm delighted to welcome with me today, well, as usual, our awesome Mornay, who makes sure everything is just running around perfectly and doing the way it should be. Always said that I want to do without you in my life. And of course, our beautiful Gabby Chung, who's no stranger to this channel, on our focus on Australia. And then both these amazing, good-looking gentlemen we have with us today on Soulful Sunday. From Australia, we have Bruce Shillingsworth, who has also been a guest on our channel before, and Rassool Snyman, who's also been a guest on our channel before from South Africa. Now, both these amazing gentlemen are descendants of the original people of our planet. So I thought this would be a great opportunity because Rassool being, I'm going to say, direct descendant of the Khoisan people, and Bruce, I'll get this Bujiti Muruwari tribe in Australia. So I just love your cultures. I have to say that. And this is the main reason why I know Gabby and I as well spoke about this. It would be so good to have you on to talk about your spirituality from the original people and two different countries. We're on the same continent though, but two different countries. What values do you guys instill in your children? What was instilled into you from the ancient, beautiful, amazing teaching that you've received? And how do we as society carry those forward into a new beginning that we're choosing to have? I think all of us can feel that things are crumbling right now in the world, and there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of fear, whatever, and people are grappling at straws a lot of the time. There's a lot of fighting going on. It's a crazy time. So I'd love to hear from you guys what you have to say to us. And yeah, so I'm going to invite you, Rassool. Welcome.
Thank you. And to the viewers and listeners, I feel privileged and honored, and I think a discussion is necessary on Indigenous values. I think it's necessary on history. It's necessary on the future as well, because we're not going back to the past, but we're using the past to go into the future. Now, for me, I believe that where we come from, the knowledge is there. It was manufactured in a sense by history, by time, by experience. And we've gotten moral guidance in terms of that. For example, we environmentalists, we live with nature, but not extract from nature and kill it. For example, we don't make carbon footprints. We don't do all the things that most other people do under the guise of civilization or business or whatever the case may be. We believe that the earth is precious, the earth is alive, the earth sustains us, and we must sustain her as well. And as a people, we don't kill, for example, animals simply for the sake of killing, but we kill to eat. And if we eat, we do not store or save or sell. So that does not make us a commercial commodity or commodity broking instrument of destruction, but it makes us rather people who understand the earth, understand replenishing the earth, understand living with the earth. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing. That really, really is. Bruce, I'd love to hear your take on that as well.
Yeah, so I suppose this particular time that we're in is a lot of the answers and the solutions are already there to the devastation and destruction that we're currently seeing. As many people may not know, we are one of the oldest living continuous cultures in the world here in Australia. I mean, and that's, we don't have to sort of give you an example on, on why. I mean, we're an isolated, we're a large body land. And, you know, we go back to our creation stories, you know, and what's been happening, especially over the last 230 years on this continent, is that we've seen a lot of disregard or a lot of lack of acknowledgement of the original peoples of the land. But people must acknowledge that we've been on our traditional land since the beginning of time. We've been on these traditional lands for thousands and thousands of years. And when you live on these lands for so long, it's not like you don't learn anything or you don't know anything. That's your criteria on how to manage the land. That's your criteria on how to sustain yourself on land. And what we're just continuously seeing is nothing but theft, death, and destruction. And I know a lot of people don't want to speak this language, but it's the truth. And I think that the truth in this time is really important, because of a lot of our history, a lot of what's being taught to our future generations now are lies and nothing, you know, and that's not sugarcoating it. A lot of the education here in Australia in particular and around the world, you know, is that the history books started back in 1770, when in reality it started 80,000 years ago. You know, and so when we look at the original sovereign people of the lands, whether it's here in Australia or in Africa, South Africa, or in America, the answers, we were already living sustainably. We were already living in harmony with one another, with the land, the flora, the fauna, you know, and the water. And people must acknowledge that us human beings are not the only entity or only thing that is living on this earth, you know, that the flora have got their own laws and customs. The flora's got their own laws and customs. We talk about cultural flows of our waterways here in Australia that has their own mini ecosystem, and in their own right they are their own living entity. And we must respect that. And we must live and abide by that. So with our future generations, it's important, and it's just devastating to see the predicament that we're in now. And what we're trying to do, I think, is to kind of go back to that way of living, but a lot of people don't want to accept that.
Yeah. I think the easy way of life has become so normal, you know, boxed foods, processed foods, you know. That's part of how they've managed to give us all these crazy GMO foods and these seeds and stuff like that. You know, we've actually lost our connection to the earth. So I'm also, you know, right now I think there's a lot of emphasis on re-educating. You know, when it comes to our children and stuff like that, because of that disconnection that we've had, you know, we've really become a very narcissistic planet at the end of the day. We've given our power away big time to the controllers, basically. So it's about reclaiming that. And I really do see that with our children. So I really think that as parents, you know, only the parents can instill those values in the children. So how do you guys see that happening in our current society, that we start reinstilling more and more of these values? What would be the way forward for you? I don't know, Rassool, South Africa is a big challenge, you know, and we're also hearing about the overpopulation in the world, and how the world can't sustain itself anymore. So we have to have these genetically modified foods and stuff like that. I mean, where's the truth in that? You know, how do we undo decades and decades of subtle brainwashing from the powers that be? I'd be interested to hear you guys' take on that.
For me, we have to look at how did we get here, you know, in order to unravel the entire ball. As was it Alexander the Great who said, you know, the Gordian knot cut the ball instead of trying to undo it. So we have to look at how did we get here. And for me, you must remember colonialism played an important part as to how did we get here, and so did capital. For example, let's say in South Africa, most people came here, they were capitalized by the banks, for example, or the money lenders, or whoever was funding these expeditions. And they changed our way of life because we were reduced from a people to commodities, and we were traded, we were taken, enslaved, our lands were taken, our histories were taken, our minds were taken, and they gave us their minds. And this was extremely problematic, especially if you look at, for example, indigenous people. We live close to the earth, but what happens? Someone else came and said, the earth is a commodity, let's sell it, let's sell you while we're at it. So that brought a material existence into our lives, which we never had. And further, it conditioned us through the education system, through religion, through a number of things. They conditioned us, and now we are where we are. How do we change that? I think we have to look at, let's say, for example, we have to fight back. We have to establish zones where we can begin to think and think together as indigenous people. We have to plan together as indigenous people, bring back the seeds, for example, the proper seeds. Let's get away from GMO. Let's get away from terminology, what you call this terminator technology. Let's begin to create seed banks. Let's begin to take media. Let's begin to write stories. Let's begin to do all of these things that they use to bring us here. Let's use them to fight back. You know, as they say, a tool is a tool. So let's do it.
Use their means to reverse on them. I love it. Yeah, totally.
So good.
Absolutely. I think I was just thinking, Rassool, when you were talking, but I think it's when we were still off air, what Bruce was saying was, and you know, the story, we were talking about storytelling, because I think a big part of our culture are missing the storytellers, and the storytellers of the world are such important people. So I just think as well, what we were saying is that to reintroduce that which has been dormant and shoved aside. I'm not going to say dead, because it's never been dead. You know, it's just been dormant, you know, and you know, to bring that back into the fore again, I think is really important, as you were saying, and as you're saying, through these various means of doing it. And it's about really storytelling that touches our heart, that has meaning. You know, if we just look at the Bible, if we just look at Christianity in the Bible, every single story and every parable we hear about Jesus has the same essence, right? He's telling you, they're telling us the same thing in a different story. So it really, I think, is about bringing back all those beautiful storytellers into the world. And sorry, please.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on the fact that even that was weaponized against our people. You speak about the Bible and religion. If people are not familiar with what happened here in Australia, when our people were rounded up, they were placed on these villages. Some of them were either a reserve or a mission. And so reserves were managed by the government and missions were managed by religious groups. So that was a mechanism to colonialize our people. So in terms of even religion, it's been something that was weaponized and manipulated to use against the original sovereign people of the land. I want to touch on something else too in terms of sovereignty and why sovereignty is a big movement at the moment in terms of the solution. We must acknowledge that we've been so displaced that in terms of getting ourselves back to a fully functional, self-sufficient state, a lot of us have to acknowledge that we have to take ourselves back first, and this is where sovereignty comes in. A lot of people talk about the environment, but a lot of us individually aren't to a point where we've got the skills, knowledge, and expertise, or the pride or the mechanisms to be able to do what it takes to get to an action point to look after the land. You know, so the sovereignty, I think, is a big movement that I observe around the world, that there is a need for us to put ourselves in a position where we're to a position that we need to listen, that we're open, that we're receptive now to, you know, listening to the original sovereign people, drawing on those thousands and thousands of years worth of knowledge, skills and expertise. Because as you said, yes, it's been shoved aside but now, and we have to acknowledge though that every day, I know here in Australia in particular, every time an elder dies, that's a library worth of knowledge that is being lost. And so that has been suppressed for over 230 years. And every day goes by, we lose an elder. And so therefore we lose a library worth of knowledge that we should be tapping into, you know, and we have to step over that now. It's not like, well, let's start the ball rolling now. It's like, no, we don't have. Time is something we don't have. It's the time now to really change our way of thinking and doing things and start tapping in to the knowledge, skills and expertise of that, you know, self-sustainability and walking forward together. It's no good. We can't ignore it anymore. You know, yeah. Otherwise, if we are choosing to ignore it, then we're choosing to ignore the existence of our future generations, or what we're leaving to our future generations, because what we have here now is only inherited from our future generations.
Absolutely.
I think we've just been so indoctrinated over generations that, you know, the mass mind control has just been so intense. And now it's just a matter of, you know, I love how both of you call out and just say, you know, we've got to call it out, we've got to expose it and call it for what it is. And that's the beginning of unraveling this nonsense and actually getting the truth out through art, through blogs, through people speaking out, through writing stories. You know, that's how we feel a world with goodness now, that it's just been so starved. And it's just hundreds and hundreds of years. Like, you think from like the Industrial Revolution, that disconnection of all people from the land, and then the colonists coming out and disconnecting our original people from the land. You know, I always like to think, you know, what have they tried to do the most? And that's the most important solution to reverse. You know, they wanted to disconnect us from the land. They wanted to disconnect us from our food so much because they knew it would make us so weak. So I know that, you know, the solutions that you're both bringing forward with reconnecting us to the land and, you know, taking that position of, you know, being a custodian of this plane and other planes as well, is just such a crucial part of us moving forward. And isn't it amazing to think like it's not reinventing the wheel, it's already been done. We just have to remember and come back to that beautiful balance within us and then in the world around us as well.
Absolutely. And I think, Bruce, what you said about sovereignty is very important, because I think until we remember our roots and remember our spirit, I'm battling to find the right word here, but I think spirit would be the most fitting right now. We will always get swept away by someone or something that we deem more powerful than us, right? So that's, you know, through the manipulation and control, that's really how we've been able to comply with so much nonsense over the years. I mean, Rassool, if we just look at South Africa, never mind the African continent, I mean, what's your take on that? You know, if we just look at the state that our country is in right now, because of exactly the stuff that Australia is talking about, but I think there's a lot more violence here. Not that I think, I know. A lot more anger, a lot more violence. How do we start reinstating that bit of peace in a constructive, practical way?
For me, I think society has taken a couple of 100 years to get where it is today. You know, if we go back and we look at the culture of violence, where did violence come from? How were the people living? before the colonial project, and how were they living?
Sound.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you just a little bit muffly.
I hope it's not the what do you call this, Wi-Fi.
Okay, now I can still hear you. It's fine. Carry on. Sorry.
Okay, what I'm saying is we need to go back and look at where did we start? How did we get here? And the colonial project, how did it bring violence to us? How did it take away our peace, take away our identity, take away the way we function? Because as indigenous people, we were never aggressive people. We were never people that invaded other people, for example. We lived where we lived, and we lived in harmony. And although there were minor skirmishes as such, there were no jails, there were no criminals, there was no random violence, for example, serial killers and so on and so forth. And one has to ask, how does society get to where it is now? How did it get there? For example, for me, I saw that the many people in the mechanized world came with the revolution, the industrial revolution, and said, we are civilized. But all they learned to do was to modify people and kill in a better manner. For example, if you have a Gatling gun or you have any other gun, you kill more people, but you still kill, which means they were more savage than they accused us of being. And one has to ask, how did they turn us into materialists? How did they turn us into people who would weigh up and say a cell phone is more important than someone's life or someone's well-being? Now that's materialism for me. And it comes through capitalism, for example, which brought us to where we are today, because we commodified life and we traded life for things. Like, for example, you have a flat screen TV. If it's big enough, someone will kill you for it. So we're trading and we're juxtaposing the life of a human against the flat screen TV. And I'm asking, how did this happen? How do we reverse it? Now, for me, we need to be talking more, we need to be writing more, we need to use the instruments that are here. Because, for example, if you look at someone like Edward Bernays, he was the guy that got American women to smoke, and he used the TV. He was a grandson or nephew of Sigmund Freud. And we have to understand how the mind works and how it imbibes what is now visual, because our world is digital now. It's got a lot of visuals, and we get bombarded with visuals all the time. I mean, here we're told that a pair of Levi's jeans are 2,500 rand, and a student who hasn't got school fees will go buy a Levi's jeans. How did that value system come into play? Bombarded with I want to be, I can be, I should be, but it's not about what is worth it to you, because a set of jeans is a set of jeans, whether it costs 90 rand or 2,500 rand. The label makes it what it is. And what the label is an indoctrination and the sales of an item to you under the wannabe context. So I'm saying, let's fight, but let's fight smartly. We've got to change the world. Believe me, we have to.
Beautiful.
Very true. I mean, you're talking about the Levi jean story and the flat screen TV, you know, about people killing for, if your TV is big enough. I mean, they'll kill for a lot less here. They'll kill for 50 cents sometimes, I've heard. You know, and it's really about the poverty consciousness and that, you know, that starvation that has also been indoctrinated into our cultures, and especially the original cultures. And I say this a lot because, as you say, you know, with the colonization, people came here, they decided that African people or the native people of the continent were savages.
Yeah.
So then came and brought their missionaries in here to convert everyone. Meanwhile, it was a grand ploy at colonization. So, you know, and that's when slavery began and the whipping began, that humiliation. It's just awful. So all of that has to be reversed. And the only way we can do that is in a loving way, you know, and not talking just. We have to talk, we have to share, but we've got to get in and show through our actions that we care. So starting the communities, starting to have transparent businesses, starting to share what your resources with those who don't have, and letting them feel what it feels like to receive. You know, it's like if one suffers, we all suffer. That really is the truth, I think, at the end of the day. So
yeah, and let me just reiterate that, and I keep stressing or expressing this point that yes, colonization or what's has happened or occurred thus far, yes, it's happened, but that doesn't mean we have to currently accept the way things are now. And I suppose that's why there is not much change that's going on in our countries or around the world. We are at a time now, I think, where in terms of the original sovereign people, the fact that we have demonstrated or we have the criteria to put our countries back or our environments back to the way that we've managed it for thousands and thousands of years, it is time, and I'm trying to be nice about this, but non-Indigenous people need to start being quiet. They need to start listening. They need to start taking their rightful place in saying, yes, when we look at power and authority, or when we look at looking after our flora and our fauna and our water and our environment, we need to start sitting down and listening to our original sovereign people that have been here for thousands of years, because that's one thing that they've done wrong in terms of colonization. Not just massacred them or taken away or oppressed them, but they've disregarded what their roles and responsibilities that their creator gave them, which was to look after their environment. Anybody that's not an original sovereign people of the land on which they live today, they need to look at respecting the original sovereign people due to their knowledge, skills, and expertise of sustaining this environment, not just for our future generations, but for non-Indigenous people's future generations.
All of us,
and so that's the point that we're at now. So even when we talk about peace, we talk about respect. Yes, it hasn't happened in the past from the colonial point of view. But that doesn't mean that we have to be peaceful. We have to be moving forward from here. We need to protect our environment. We need to protect our future generations. We're not going to take up arms to go and colonize a foreign country. We're not going to take up arms to go and colonize a foreign piece of land. We are simply protecting our environment, and we are simply protecting our future generations. And that's where the fight needs to be. Not a fight, but there needs to be a stance. And that's the avenues we've taken here in Australia. We're setting up a nationwide law enforcement, not that's funded by government or anything to do with politics or colonization. It's where original sovereign people and non-Indigenous people can stand together and actually say, no, we're not going to take up arms to fight you, but we're going to protect what we have now and move forward with that. So I think we're in a time now where we have to respect the original sovereign people. We have to acknowledge that with truth and true history, that there has been damage, that there has been nothing but theft, death, and destruction. And moving forward, we have to realign that. We have to change that now. And I think everybody's at that consensus to say, yes, we all acknowledge that now. And so it's not trying to do it within the system. It's not trying to do it within the system that has done it to us for thousands or for hundreds of years here in Australia, but maybe longer for other countries. It's us being able to do that from a sovereign perspective. An individual sovereign being or an individual community or self-sustainable community. I mean, here in Australia, we're pretty lucky that we've got a big land mass that we can still sustain ourselves. We don't have to be reliant on the system. When we go down into looking at how do we feed our families or put food on the table, we've got bush tucker out there. When we look at education, well, education is not only the industrial way of indoctrination education system. We need to take them back out in the land, teach them about medicine. We need to teach them on how to skin a kangaroo or an emu, you know, how to look after the environment. When we look at a community and environment, who better to do it than people that have sustained themselves on their traditional lands or tribal lands for thousands of years? It's simple. It's a simple, this is not complex. I think people are thinking, well, that's all too hard. But just because that this system seems too hard to dismantle doesn't mean we can't make the individual choice. Doesn't mean we can't make the family choice. Doesn't mean we can't make the community choice.
Bruce, an interesting, sorry, Gabby, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just on that point, what I find interesting is that, you know, you're talking about teaching kids, and I fully agree with that, because there's been studies done in the past that anyway says boys, especially boys, up until the age of 12, should never be educated indoors. Whatever the education system is, they need the outdoors, they need the fresh air, it's got to be kind of done outside. And it's so true. But I'm a girl that grew up on a farm, and I'm born in the 60s. So it was like through the 70s and the 80s that I spent my time on the farm. And, you know, it was really a beautiful time because I had a great father who was a brilliant farmer. And so he understood about conservation and stuff like that. You know, very much like you kill when you need to and you honor the animal and that sort of stuff. So I'm very fortunate to have had that. But I remember even going back to then, my friends who weren't from the farm, just what they ate was so different. You know, from eating farm meat at the time, your own veggies that you grow, your own chickens, you know, your own fruits, everything was from our farm, you know, from my dad's and my mom's production. And, you know, but even then, we're going back to kids when we didn't have TV and stuff then, right? So there was not mass media indoctrination then the way that it is now. But there were kids who were completely unaware of what it meant to grow your own food. My cousins used to live in Johannesburg. They used to come to us on holiday and their eyes used to be like this because they couldn't actually believe what they were seeing. So what I'm saying is, over the last 30 or 40 years, since there's been television and stuff like that, and this whole fast food industry has boomed in the way that it has, this has become a big problem. This has become a big problem. And, you know, if anything, this is where we have to go back to. And I so agree, we've got to teach our children different ways. Bruce, just while I'm still on with you, just have the question. You guys are doing stuff with kids now, because I'm seeing you actually doing programs or whatever it is. I don't know if the right word is programs, but teaching kids. What exactly are you doing regarding that?
So look, the way forward, as I said again, what we have now, or even this time, is borrowed from our future generations, in saying that whatever we leave or whatever we do in this space of time is what they are going to, we've just borrowed from them, because, you know, if we create a mess, for example, well, that's a mess that we've created for them, our future generations. But we're going back to cultural education. We're going back to educating. I suppose when you look at the problem, a lot of the problem is with trust. And let me talk a little bit about religion here. I'm not trying to pick out one religion in particular, but when our belief should be our belief or our trust in the Creator. And I think this is all taken out of context. Having trust in our environment, we don't have that anymore. People go to fridges for their food. People go to doctors when they're sick. You know, people end up in the system of law when they're being disciplined. It's all upside down. So what we're teaching our kids is that we're going back to teaching a self-sufficient, independent way that you as an individual or your family down the line or your community can be self-sufficient and look after yourself alongside the environment. And so a lot of the stuff that we do is we just take our young'uns out in the bush, and we don't teach them in a way of a classroom kind of learning. We don't teach them as in, this is how you got to do it verbally. A lot of it's them observing how we do things, because we have to acknowledge, we have to leave room for them to be able to develop. They might do it even more environmentally or efficient in their time. So it's not about telling them on how to do things. It's about them learning on how to do it by them observing us and how we do it. Like, for example, going out and being able to get a kangaroo or an emu, for example, we have to give thanks. We have to acknowledge, like if we're talking about the connection of the being conscious of the role and responsibilities of even our flora and fauna on the land. Well, the kangaroos, see, they don't eat the green grass, they eat the dead grass. And so what they do is when they eat the dead grass, they go out and then they spread the seeds. And people don't understand that. And so through their droppings, that's how they are able to spread the vegetation throughout our land. And what we've seen over the last 230 years is a lot of fencing off of our traditional lands. And so we've been through a 10-year man-made drought, and some of our elders are talking about, when they want to speak to our elders about the water and the drought, well, our elders start talking about the role and responsibilities of our animals. And they're like, well, how do we put two and two together? Well, the elders are saying, well, they're all interrelated. We're talking about an ecosystem here where everyone and everything has a part to play in it. And what's important in our area is that the kangaroos are able to undertake their roles and responsibilities, because the Creator didn't just put them here for nothing either. They created them for a purpose within our ecosystem. And so if animals or even plants go extinct, well, there's something wrong. And when they do go extinct, that means that there is a disruption to the ecosystem on which we need to sustain ourselves. So we're wanting to take our kids back out now and to teach them. And even non-Indigenous people are so open and receptive to that. But as I said, the amount of time people struggle to give up their earthly or worldly possessions, their materialistic possessions, to start to walk in a more sustainable way. I mean, and what you're looking at is people currently got houses, they've got cars, but with the original sovereign people, we used to walk not even with a bottle of water back in our time, because we had the knowledge, skills and expertise on knowing where the water holes were. We knew where to get bush tucker. We knew the climate and how to deal with the climate. And that's all you need. We want to be able to get back to that way, because we see through cars, the impacts it's doing in terms of climate change. We look at the materials that's used to build houses. People are building mansions now. Those resources had to have come from somewhere. And so when we talk about sustainability, that's a sustainable way of living in the environment, with the environment. And that's what we're teaching.
Wow.
Absolutely.
There's been such an inversion of all the values, of what humanity is actually here to do, with this capitalism and colonialism, just greed, and it's so beautiful to hear how simple the solutions are. And, I love what both of you are talking about in terms of, it's not so much fighting the system, it's definitely standing against it, but we can now create parallel societies. We have the space, we have the skills, we have the ancient knowledge, and choose to actually create with goodness and create with love, which is a beautiful solution for all of this madness, all this suffering that's been going on for so long.
Absolutely. Rassool, I'd love to hear your take on that, on the whole education system and educating our kids.
Well, personally, I think there needs to be a sort of indigenous education system. It has to be a system, because we're fighting a system, and if we're going to replace the system, we need to bring out our own system that teaches us the values, that tells us our history, that takes away the bias and subjectivity of even things like history. For example, if you don't know where you come from, it's very seldom that you know where you're heading. So for us, we have to reclaim the past, and reclaiming the past means you have to go into the sciences, for example. You have to go into, let's say, virtual museums. You have to go into virtual storage spaces. You have to use instruments like the cloud, for example, and build what I consider to be museums, because there are some things that belong in museums, some things have to be protected, and that's the place where you can protect it because society is changing. And for me, it's always about the scale, the scope and scale of your intervention, because if 10 people are trying to change another 100 people and the state is fighting you and changing thousands and thousands and millions at a time, you're fighting an uphill battle. So we have to now look at the media and say, as indigenous people, can we say on every channel in the media there should be an indigenous channel, you know, that deals with history, that deals with ecology, that deals with all the things that we deal with, and transfer the wealth, the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge to those who don't know. Because many environmentalists in the world are saying, let's save the world, and they know that the indigenous people had the ability to live in harmony with the world and keep the balance. So we have to sell the balance. We have to fight with the same tools. As I'm saying, we go to the media, we take over a channel, and we start explaining to the world how
I love it.
Works.
Take over a channel.
It's so cool.
Many of us have come to the world and it's unbalanced, really unbalanced. If there's no equilibrium in the world, then the world flips over to one side or the other. And we're saying we can't go back to the past because we can't do that. The past is the past, but we can take the lessons from the past and put them into the future. So we need to future think, so to speak. We need to say, how do we design cities that bring in indigenous knowledge, skills, medicine, science, and so on and so forth. We cannot sit back and say, okay, the colonizer will do it for us. I don't agree with that. I say we need to do things and teach people, and to teach, you have to be very aggressive in your teaching. You have to be very, how can I say, aggressive going into the marketplace, so to speak. You've got to create a niche, take that niche, consolidate it, and then look for the next niche. Now, for many of us, we're trying to go to the past and live in the past. The past is past, it's gone. I don't think going back and living in a mud hut or a straw hut is going to change the world. What we have to do is design things that fit into nature. For example, I sell Wendy houses made of wood. I sell them because I know someone's going to buy a wooden house and live in a wooden house, and they're close to nature. I do, for example, log cabins. Now, for many of us, we hold nature and our way of life to be a hobby. It's aside from what we call our real life, and our real life is immersed in materialism. We have to change our lives. If I say I love something, I have to work around that. If I do a job, I do it around that. If I have a hobby, I do it around that. If I have a pastime, I do it around that. And for me, change the world. That's my philosophy. Change the world. If you don't like it, change it. And we have to go, but we have to go back strategically. We have to go back and say, what will the cost be? Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? How do we train them to do it right? What are the measurables that come out of this? And I believe that if we all as indigenous people start now, I've got a group on Facebook called Indigenous People International. I'd like all the indigenous people to come to that group, for example, and start talking about the solutions, talking about the future.
Wow.
Do we improve technology, for example? Do we make technology friendly? You know, and deal with the problems of the day, because we aren't doing that. We're saying, okay, let me go back to the past, I'll solve the future. And I'm saying, no. Let's learn from the past, store the past somewhere, so those coming will be able to see the past and learn from it as well. We should be creative. It's going out of fashion. I mean, for example, I write stories. I write children's stories because I'm targeting my market. I'm saying if I address them while they're young, they grow up into responsible adults. I also have a project called the trees for life. We intend planting 1 million trees. We want people to go back to the earth, learn how to plant, go to the schools, have projects with the schools, go to the neighborhoods and get people to plant on the roads and do these kinds of things that are active, but at the same time bring an income or ameliorate the conditions of the oppressed. And I think our people were oppressed and dispossessed. We also have to learn to share. Like if you look at society currently, everyone is for themselves. I must have, never mind you, and not trying to teach people give, because giving has its own benefits. For example, if I give someone 20 trees, those 20 trees will become 40, 60, 80, 100 million, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Now, we aren't investing in the future, and I like future things. We must think about the future and plan for it. Like as I've said earlier, we've got to have every home, we go through the home, we get them into gardening, for example. Why waste space? You use your roof is unused, use it. The garden is unused, use it. The wall is unused, use it. So we work practically and we're looking forward and saying, can we plant 1 million trees in 10 years? That 1 million trees, if it gives us two seeds each, that means it's 3 million in another year's time. So we have to think proactively and give rewards. Like they say, if you're going fishing, don't carry jam and bread if the fish love worms. Give them worms, and we should do that. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, I love it. It's so true. Yeah. Just, and I especially like taking over a radio station. Which one are we after, Rassool? Are we going after 5 FM or 94.7? What are we after?
We want a channel on every available spectrum, like from the spectrum. Let's say, for example, a TV channel. We should take it over. We should present. Which means you have to have writers, you have to have conceptual thinkers, you have to have people to administer. You need a whole range of people just to do that. Now, for us as indigenous people, we pull apart from each other because we've been taught that way, we've been socialized, we've been politicized in that way. Pull apart rather than come together. If we can pull the indigenous people together, believe me, we can change the world because we have a plan, we strategize, we say, how do I work? I mean, for example, I just from the indigenous people who are speaking to Leonard Peltier, for example, who's in jail right now. And we saying, how can the state put someone in jail simply for fighting for their rights? Now, we must remember that the state is not going to sit down because the state is driven by economics, and the economics are the property of the capitalist elite. And they, believe me, if they can turn us into commodities, take our goods, turn them into patents and sell it back to us, then they're in the game, they're happy with it. If we come and say this belongs to us, the people, and it's free, they'll kill us, they'll jail us, they'll do everything that they can because we are threatening their most prized possession, and that's money.
Yeah.
So we have to look at the economics. We have to be stronger. We have to think differently. We must realize that although we're not saying it, but we're at war. And I just wrote a piece that the indigenous people are at war. There's a silent war on indigenous people. If you look at it, they are the governments who are fighting you, then they are the corporations, and they're doing this through extractive economies. Australia should have the same, where you get people like Rio Tinto coming in and saying, we want your land, we want your minerals, we'll talk for you. They appropriate the voice of the oppressed, they appropriate the voice of the colonized, and they appropriate the voice of the indigenous people while taking what they want. Now, Rio Tinto is making a number of claims. They're claiming we will speak for the indigenous people. But what they're saying is if you can't get around government, they'll use the indigenous people to get around government. So that's a wily move, a strategic move, and we have to fight it. Like, for example, I in South Africa should write a letter on behalf of the indigenous people in Australia and say this doesn't work. If we have a problem, I'd like to have the Australian people write to our government and say this doesn't work. For example, we have we've got a network. I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't network, you make that network.
Absolutely. Brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah, it's so true. The problem is so much the mass mind control. And if we can change the story, we change the future. So amazing.
And I love what you're saying there, Rassool, about connecting with all the Indigenous people of the world and actually forming a network and working together as a unified force. I think that is genius. Honestly, I think that would be a genius way to move ahead, because as we're hearing from both of you, you both have the same values in terms of how to go about it or what to do really and what needs to be done. And it's through people like yourselves that these stories get carried through and that we remember what we need to remember. So I think it's amazing and very valuable, this information that you, well, it's not information, that's the wrong word, but to to remind us as the reminders of the world, to remind us of what we've forgotten. And I think that's a very beautiful thing. Yeah, thank you for that, guys. Wow, incredible.
Chantelle, there's a great guy called Dr. Don Matera. He's a poet, he's a writer, he's a thinker. And he wrote a book called Memory is the Weapon. And we
Memories in?
Regain. Memory is the weapon.
Memory is a weapon.
Yes, and we have to regain our memories because we forgot who we were. Our historical memories are gone. They twisted, they warped and sold back to us and superimposed on some of our kids. Like, for example, though I'm not going to make this religious, but we've got to make this part of the topic, because if you look at the indigenous people in Canada right now, and you look at how they were indoctrinated, how they were shepherded into, let's say, the school system, how they were taught to look un-indigenous, to think un-indigenous, to lose the un-indigenous values, we have to go back to that system and say, what do we do? You know, how do we fight it? And for me, it's about fighting the system. I have to fight the system because the fact that you don't fight the system does not mean the system's not fighting you. You know, and we have to realize we're at war. Currently, the indigenous people are at war. I mean, throughout the world, if you go even to, let's say, what's this country, Malaysia, where they're appropriating the voice of the indigenous people. You go to Indonesia, they're appropriating the voice of the indigenous people. The government of the place speak for the people, and that's a form of appropriation. Where someone takes your voice, takes away your agency, takes away your power, and pushes you into being a subaltern society. We're not subaltern, we own the earth. You know, so I find it very ingenuous when we say sovereign and we don't fight for sovereignty. I'm a sovereign being. I must fight for sovereignty. I must protect it. I must defend it. I must promote it. And I must promote it to everyone that I can, using every weapon at my disposal. And the main weapon is here. I've got to decolonize my mind, and I've got to spread decolonization. I've got to speak decolonization. I've got to identify it and talk around it to those that still colonize. So for many of us, I believe it's a political matter, it's a social matter, it's a cultural matter, and it's also a traditional matter. However, it's a war that we're fighting on many fronts. And as America says, they use multi-spectrum dominance. They dominate you in all fields. We have to have a counter strategy that is multi-spectrum dominance. For example, we have to develop an indigenous economy. We have to develop an indigenous media. We have to develop an indigenous educational system. We have to develop indigenous hospitals, for example. We have to do a range of things, and we have to do them all at once. And we can do it all at the same time if we get together. Unity is the main thing for me, and we can start exchanging ideas. For example, I've got a project called the Indigenous Indigenous Symposium on Clothing or something like that. And what it says is the indigenous people are having their cultures expropriated. For example, you go to Canada, the so-called mercantile class has taken away the ideas of designing clothes, but they're using indigenous designs and they're upscaling it and they're selling it, but the indigenous people are getting nothing. You go to the same thing is happening, and the Australians are beginning to get involved in design and so on and so forth. And in South Africa, we're trying to promote it too. And we say, if we come together and have a symposium every year, we turn, let's say, South Africa into a Paris of indigenous people. Believe me, we can take back our economies, we can take back our businesses, we can take back even the industrialization of our arts and cultures and so on and so forth. If we combine that with the college and we say, the indigenous college, you know, if you in America, you come here, if you, what do you call this? In Australia, you come here and we come there, we deal with the Sami, we deal with you, we deal with everyone else. That means we're developing ideas together, and with those ideas, we can now fight equally armed to the system that's fighting us, because the system oppresses, by nature it oppresses. If you look at Ukraine and Russia, same story. The war there affects us all, and we have to look at ourselves and say, if anything happens, if there's a fallout, what do we do? How do we protect our people? How do we protect our way of life? Because right now it's a way of life that we are promoting, and we have to change the way of life of the majority of the people to get control of the minority.
Yeah.
We start at the top. Now, many of us don't engage politics. We say, no, that's not cultural. But I'm saying culture is politics. You know, if you go into the history of the indigenous American people, for example, they had something called a ghost dance. They used that to unite the people against General Custer, and they beat you. So I'm saying we need our own cultural ghost dance to raise our people's spirit and make them warriors instead of merely pacifists who are sitting and saying, okay, I'll raise my chicken and goat. I don't believe that. I believe that as indigenous people, we shouldn't be asking them, we should be teaching them to follow and let them follow. Let us lead, let them follow. But we can't lead unless we powerful. We can't be powerful unless we unite. So for me, I'm saying, let's unite, let's start exchanging ideas, let's start thinking about the future, let's bring it together and let's build.
Oh, so beautiful.
Absolutely. Bruce, I would just love to hear, maybe, I know our time is up already, but I would just maybe like to hear if you have anything to say in closing. I've really loved our conversation. Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, our solution, or what we're working towards, is upholding law, which is LORE, natural law, and the way things should be. That is the issue. That's the fundamental issue that we're experiencing at the moment. I mean, in Australia in particular, the natural way things should be is the original sovereign people of their diverse 369 nations should have control of those regions. But yet we see an Australian federal government, we see states and territories, and then we see local governments that are making decisions for our communities and our regions. So we talk about law in terms of looking after the environment. As I keep saying, it's not about accepting the current way things are. With change, or fighting for change, it's not accepting the way things are, otherwise things aren't going to change. So law is the forefront of the fight and the solution that we're trying to reorient back towards today, because we see that things that have happened that are not natural and that should never have happened, and our job should be to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. So I like what Uncle is saying there in terms of, you know, if Australia is doing something that in South Africa that they don't agree with, or if we don't have permission, well, they should be able to consult with the original sovereign people of Australia and say, no, this is what we don't like, or we should be sitting down and saying, well, this doesn't work for us. And that's the natural or respectful way of going about things. But we have people that are, or systems that are in place that have a total disregard for the people, total disregard for the environment, let alone a lack of criteria or background, knowledge, skills and expertise on how to do things in a more natural way. So that's why we're fighting here to uphold law, LORE. And I think, again, go back to a conscious state, which is, if you don't know what to do, all you need to do is acknowledge who the first original peoples are of this land, or who sustained this land before it got to this mess in the first place, and then move from there. And that's basically what we're seeing now. A lot of people don't want to give up their earthly, their worldly, their physical possessions. But I think we're going to have to get to a point where if we don't stop now continuously doing what we're doing, we're only going to, the existence of our future generations are at risk here. We've seen this through the pandemic. We're not looking at their best interest, or we're not looking at their existence, or, the best sustainable way moving forward. It's all just about these systems or these elites and stuff like that. But I mean, I want to touch on the positive stuff too. And when we're talking about law, when we're talking about, that there is an overpopulation, well, we had a system in place that mitigated that. When we talk about a sustainable way of living, well, we had that. We talk about sharing and stuff like that. Well, we did share. We're talking about how do we respect? Well, we did respect one another. And so there's always this perception out in society that the original sovereign people are of a lower stature or lower class, that they don't contribute to society, or they don't. And that's the mentality that needs to change. Look, our work is looking after the environment as we have for thousands of years. And the thing is, because we've been dispossessed, well, how do we do that? We don't want to be a part of a system that continuously feeds or recreates the problem. We want to be a part of the solution, or know what we know or what we've done for thousands of years. So thanks very much for getting us on tonight and having a yarn. All respect to the original sovereign mob over there, where you are. And I think it's time that people have no choice but to sit down and listen to the original sovereign people now, because, it's going back to what we know, and going back to what's natural, going back to what's basic. You don't have to go to university to understand all this stuff. You only have to be a human being, listen, be open and receptive to the solution.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, here on Aquarius Rising Africa, we'll certainly be a constant support source for that, and a platform. We will definitely do what we need to do from our side to keep putting that across. So, and I know Gabs there from Oz will definitely, is already doing that. So I just think it's a great time. And I know Mornay as well. You've been very quiet today, Mornay. Do you want to say hi?
Well, it's all about us. We should listen to the original people. So I'm sitting and listening to the original people. I can listen to you guys for hours. And I totally agree. You guys need a platform. The world needs to listen to the original people again. They're so wise. They just know how to live on the earth, and we've completely forgot that. And I think it all comes back to that connection with earth. When we live with the earth, with the cycles, then there's nothing to learn. But as soon as you disconnect from earth, then you're disconnected from everything, and you forget everything. I mean, we as a civilization has forgotten all this, how can you say it? I don't want to say it. It's simplistic knowledge. It's basic ABC. Look at the water, look at the animals, and everything will be fine. But yeah, so thank you guys for coming on our show, sharing your stories, and I think the world needs this right now more than ever. Thank you.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Thank you. Gabs, is there anything you have to say in closing today?
Just thank you to both of you for joining us. And, I absolutely love hearing your solutions, your understandings and your truths about our history that we so need to rediscover at this time. And, this is what it's all about, is the grassroots community solutions. We need to decentralize the power, because going back to these centralized systems of power is exactly what they want, the pyramid, and come back to meeting as communities where we're all leaders, all contributing, and all building these connections with each other, with the earth, and all around the world. Yeah, so it's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rassool. Is there anything you have to say just in closing, Rassool?
Yeah. For me, I think we should build all the time. Today, we should exchange numbers. If you want to come to Facebook and join the Democratic Federation of Indigenous People International, come there. Let's start talking about how do we unite international Indigenous people internationally. Let's start exchanging ideas. Let's brainstorm. Let's turn this into a platform that brings about results, that brings about change. And change only happens between you and I. By us talking today, we can turn it into an action tomorrow. That like a stone that falls into a pond, the ripples will go out. Let's be catalytic in our thinking. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, guys, come to that site, join it. We can even sign an agreement between all indigenous people, call an indigenous meeting globally, for example, and ask the UN to put the money into this. And we all meet as indigenous people outside of government, because the UN is a government-sponsored vehicle. We can have an indigenous vehicle that is uniting all indigenous nations. And then we start talking about how do we change the world, what's happening to us, what are they taking away, and how do we give it back? That is the plan for me.
Well, I think that is such a beautiful plan. And I think, honestly, you know, what you're doing there, Rassool, is amazing. The connection, that's, you know, the idea to connect all the indigenous tribes. My gosh, how powerful is that going to be? You know, when it's done on a conscious level and, you know, everyone is working together. We will definitely be putting your links in the description area below. So for anyone to contact Bruce, Rassool, Gabby, us, whatever, the links will be below. And I would love to have you two gentlemen back on again. I'll speak with you off air. And I would love to see us create a vehicle to move forward and to spread this awareness. Together, we can do it. And, you know, if there's one person today who gets a little aha moment and a wake-up moment, then it's mission accomplished already. So I want to say to you guys, thank you so, so much for joining us here on Solutions with Aquarius Rising Africa, because this really is where our hearts are intent on finding solutions in the way forward. So we'd love to hear your comments from the viewers, the listeners. Please give us a like and a subscribe, and please share this far and wide, because this is really the kind of stuff that we need to be getting out there. Share, share, share. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Mwah. Take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you back here very, very soon. Happy Sunday to wherever you are in the world.